Hey Dom, how's it going?
What's going on, Marty?
Good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, glad to be here on my porch this time. It's a nice, rainy, cool day out.
Yeah, we got these little fuzzy blue mics
Yeah.
this time, so my loud voice won't override yours, hopefully, quite so much. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, yeah, so we're now into part 3 here. This is thinking about reading in recovery. So we've decided for some strange reason to read High Weirdness by Eric Davis, and we're on to we did an introduction, we did the McKenna brothers, and now we're doing Robert Anton Wilson, and just been thinking about our own journey into sobriety, the most general way you can think about that, but also, just recovery, also just in general as a process rather than kind of a done deal sort of a thing. And so we are getting into stuff and conversations that are part of more long-term thinking about it. So anyways, so why would we do this with High Weirdness and Robert Anton Wilson especially, who was definitely not a sober dude, and neither were the McKennas. So anyways, we are thinking about this just because I think it just talks a lot about how, we can continue to live psychedelically, even in sobriety.
Interesting way to put it,
Yeah.
but I'm fully on board with that. Yeah.
So and this one really allows us to think about mind fucks, if you will.
Yeah, can we talk about the term real quick?
Please.
I had to look it up because I did not expect that
it's a
they
technical
were saying
term.
mindfuck. I thought it was PHU, mindfuck, something like that. I think it's such a pervasive term, especially lately. People talk about being mindfucking each other. Didn't know it was a term for an actual prank that got out of hand very quickly.
Yes. And had very questionable ethics as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that is one of the most interesting parts of at least the first part of this chapter, is that it really dives into a more prank-esque style of manipulating society versus CIA actual intelligence, attempting to mindfuck the world out of not really being able to understand their world in any sort of way that is together or conjoined, creating these little facets of, people's own reality, I think it's really cool that they didn't want a conjoined, unified reality. They thought, okay, well, let's separate everyone a little bit more, and no one would know what to trust or believe, and they, I think, succeeded continuously. But yeah, it's such a weird little concept.
For sure. I was thinking about one incident that I was aware of where, well, it's not one incident, they used to do it all the time, where the Grateful Dead used to dose people just unbeknownst to them, and I just always thought that was really unethical, and kind of frightening, really. Of course, the CIA examples in the book that they give are also rather unethical, and LSD in particular was tested to see if it could be some kind of a truth serum or whatever, so they would test it on unwitting soldiers and whatnot, and found that it wasn't that effective, and was getting out of hand with the hippies having got a hold of it or whatever. So it is I don't know, a big ethical question about fucking with people's reality, but let's bring it to the I don't know if he's the OG. He's not really the OG, but he's kind of, let's just start with this, and then we'll maybe go back further. How about H.P. Lovecraft, who was, interestingly, aware of some psychedelics, probably mescaline and stuff like that, although he wasn't much of a partaker in any of that, as far as I know, at any rate. But, he was able to mindfuck people totally without, without the use of any mind-altering substances or whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he was partaking in psychedelic experiments. However, a lot of his writings that came from his hypnagogic states, in and out of sleep, a lot of his dream work.
Good point.
I think he was still in that headspace at times. But yeah, as early as the 1920s, when he came out with the Necronomicon, he really started to dive into that, fiction creating reality.
And that whole idea of having books in his books that were references, some of them real, some of them not, and then other people referencing his books and their books and characters in his books, and like kind of world building, if you will, creates quite a mind fuck. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the world building that all of these fiction writers turned dogmatic, preachers, I think, well, at least if there wasn't their own intention, but other people adapted them as dogma. I think a world building is an extremely accurate term for them, because people adapted them into their own lives and build out entire deities and religious, gnosis based off of these completely fictional, fabricated ideas,
yes,
which then retroactively were created as something that was real,
Yeah.
I think especially with the Necronomicon, they describe it as a completely fictional book that was then adapted into reality. And then Lovecraft kind of winked at it and said, oh, yeah, maybe this was pulled from some cosmic, alternate universe. And that's what imprinted it into my brain, which then I was the vessel to put this out into the world. Therefore, it's true.
Yeah. Really, really kind of interesting. Because he was... on the one hand, he proclaimed at any rate to be a hardcore materialist, and he actually made fun of Crowley on different occasions. Was very skeptical of that kind of shit.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, just as you say, not only him, but other people looked at his materialism and said, oh yeah, maybe these people, especially in the Necronomicon, are not, you made them up perhaps, but you were somehow tapped into some collective unconscious or some I don't know, dark realm that you weren't aware of, and I mean that you weren't aware of having entered or whatever.
I mean, I think he was aware and unaware of it at the same time. We were talking about the quote I really liked, completely paraphrasing, where he understood that he was in a materialist reality. However, these fictional creatures would pop up into his world, and his I forget the way he put it, but a symbolic archetype that he had in his mind would then get questioned, and he would be brought into this, well, is this real? Is this not a materialist society? Are we? And then he says at the end of it that he knew damn well that he was fooling himself, but again, he slipped in and out of this, is this real versus is this just a figment of fiction that I created?
Yeah, and so one of the phrases, and I'm not sure where Eric Davis got it, but I kind of like it. It's useful here. He talks about double entry bookkeeping. So at times, our characters, especially Robert Anton Wilson, is able to keep the two realities in check. So consensus reality on the one hand, scientifically verifiable, third person, whatever, observable reality on the one hand, and then this magical place, magic with a K, if Crowley would have his way or whatever. But the idea here is that you're perfectly aware of, what's real, but you're also at the same time kind of entering this naivete about reality in order to enter this second sort of reality. When Robert Anton Wilson was developing his, whatever you want to call it, methodologies, ritualistic methodologies, he would say that, he would have to, when he was tripping or whatever, when he was in a dark Crowleyan ritual, he was very much, trying to enact a lot of different Crowleyan teachings and rituals and stuff like that, that he would need to give himself over to it entirely. So just enter the psychosis entirely, if that's what it is, and and then for it to be efficacious. But then again, in order for it to not become total delirium, he would need to be, when he came out of it, re-enter that kind of skeptic, which we see portrayed as kind of a cynical, ironical kind of stance that was able to at least, rational actually as well, laugh about it.
I think he was, I don't know if terrified is the right term, but I think he was scared of getting too deep, which is why, he describes the only two outcomes for when you're in that sort of psychotic state is either straight up agnosticism that you can kind of, poke fun at and be like, well, I don't know if this is real. And the other side is just pure unadulterated belief in what you see is to be true. And I think he does play really well at, leaning on both sides and kind of entering and exiting as he pleases. Yeah.
And so Robert Anton Wilson enters it and gets stuck for a while. And we see an example in the book, and John Lilly famously developed the sensory
Deprivation
tank,
tanks. Yeah.
who loses it once he switches to. It's a drug that is being used now, or the psychedelic that's being ketamine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Boy, I'm having brain lapses. But anyways, when Lily switched to ketamine, I guess, as portrayed in this book, at any rate, he just really never came back. He just stayed on it, was fully convinced of all kinds of conspiracies and alien presences, and there was just no more questioning anything. This reminds me, we got to sometime watch the book. Watch the movie. I think it's called Altered States with William Hurt, where he gets in a sensory deprivation chamber on LSD or whatever. Yeah. So God only knows what the hell happens at that point. But
yeah, I know during my height of psychedelic experiences, that was, I think, right around the time a sensory deprivation float spa opened up next to.
Oh, you did it?
A place that I worked.
Tripping?
No, I've never. No, but I will tell you that even in a sober state, the whole point is that it isolates your brain from everything else. You float.
Yeah, no senses.
Body
Sensations.
temperature. Yeah. Time moves very differently. It is extremely unsettling. I don't think I ever relaxed in this float spa. It was definitely not a spa for me. I thought it was.
This is a real theme. As I've already kind of said, I don't have a lot of firsthand experiences at all. Those that I did were insanely unpleasant. But and I was just really surprised to find out that of all your experience, none of it was pleasant. It was all very fucking fear-based.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was fear-based for sure. I think if anything, it made me appreciate the comfort outside of those experiences. But I don't know. For some reason, I kept coming back.
Yeah, well, you're a psychonaut. You're an explorer, and I think I am too. I don't know. I just don't have quite the fortitude that you do. I think you just have something that keeps you away, like a survival instinct that I must have lacked when I was younger. Maybe I don't know. But anyway, back to our friend H.P. Lovecraft. So he very interestingly developed a whole mythology, a whole demonology that was complete bullshit. Well, it wasn't complete. A lot of it, at that time especially, there was a lot of what's called not synchronicity, syncretism in religious practice, especially starting with the I always say their name wrong. Theosophical Society. Yeah, anyway, yeah, Madame Blavatsky, and then eventually Rudolf Steiner broke off from her. I think he became an anthropo-theosophical guy. but anyway, it doesn't matter. So because I got a lot of problems with pronunciation and stuff. But these kind of movements where they were combining all kinds of what they perceived to be ancient religious practices, because a lot of this stuff was becoming available through scholarship. There was there had been a big Egyptology craze, and looting of Egypt and of Mesopotamia in the 19th century by all kinds of European scholars and archaeologists and whatever. And so they were actually discovering spells from ancient Mesopotamia and stuff like that, and and then we're trying to take these spells and and especially a lot of them were very mysterious. They didn't really know what they were for sometimes, and had weird named gods whatnot.
If we go to Robert Anton Wilson, during his highest level of psychedelic experience, he was using a Greco-Roman exorcist ritual to get him into a headspace, even though it's him in his apartment doing these rituals high on LSD, experiencing earthquakes, calling that synchronicity, and just falling in and out of complete
let's
psychotic
talk about that
states.
episode for a second. That's a really good example, actually, of... So what we're looking here is a balance between skepticism on the one hand and belief on the other. So synchronicities would seem to, fall into the camp of there's something other than you, another intelligence communicating with you, or is somehow designing your life. And so the example of the earthquake is a good one, because So I think he was tripping or something like that, right?
I think it was like 50 micrograms of LSD.
Yeah, and he came. Sorry, and then he came.
He's an absurd man. I get it.
And he's performing this ritual, and these fucking demon dogs show up.
Yeah.
And
demon dogs and the most beautiful women he's ever seen surround him.
Of course, yeah, because he's a big sex magic guy. And so anyway, but it was very fear based because he was like fucking scared as shit of these dogs. Like they felt like truly other, not just a projection. But he kind of got himself out of it apparently by like doing the rational thing, which is like, these are a projection of something in me, whatever, like chilled out. But then like there was this like totally crazy earthquake where the bed was shaking and all this stuff, and he was like tripping at the time, and it was a real earthquake, independently verifiable. This thing actually happened. But the fact that it happened while at this like kind of climactic moment of his fucking trip or whatever, where he was in the middle of trying to decipher what's real and what isn't, and then something happens that happens in reality that seems to be like, yeah, it's real or whatever, and, you know, like, but there's always this, I don't know, emphasis in like not getting sucked. I mean, that could suck you in, like Jesus, like the world, like just happened to have an earthquake, right? You know what I mean? Like it could totally get you into a paranoid loop or something like that.
I mean, similar to the McKenna brothers, they definitely emphasize their set and setting while, you know, hallucinating. They definitely try to curate this experiment that they could have verifiable evidence afterwards to kind of associate that trip with something otherworldly. And unfortunately, you can't set up an entire experience because outside things are going to happen. So that earthquake, I'm sure, broke his network that he was trying to develop, and then he had to crawl out of it unknowingly, unexpectedly. But yeah, you listen to him in that trip trying to completely reframe. You know, he would try something, it wouldn't work, and then he would reframe it as if, I'm going to do it through this new ritual, and that would allow me to enter this experience the way that it should be. Which, again, I don't think there's any psychedelic experience that can be curated, you know, solely in a vacuum. You know, maybe if you're in a sensory deprivation tank. But if you're sitting in your apartment, there's things that are going to happen out of your control. And I think that really shows how, one, naive, and how, you know, he thought he was the designer. You know, he got all these ideas from
right. Nice. Yeah, this is a good point.
He got all these ideas, and like, you know, from outside societies, organizations that are thousands of years old. He believed that he was getting transmissions from all, you know, alien beings. However, in that moment, he thought he was still in control of his own, you know, reality, you know, census, and he was, I think, a little deluded.
Yeah, so let's back up the delusion a little bit to the kind of, I don't know, the beginning of it. You know, I think he's from one of the boroughs in New York City. I want to say like maybe Brooklyn or something like that. It doesn't matter. But anyways, kind of interesting childhood. Grew up Catholic, big family, like poor Irish. And he got polio, and it stayed with him his whole life. So he was like, his physical ailments around polio came back. There was like a phenomenon with polio where you know it could resurge and stuff like that. So like a lot of his spiritual questing like actually had to do with like an interest in healing and that kind of a thing. And so eventually, though, through a series of all kinds of interesting stuff. I mean, he actually lived in Ohio here for a while in like a commune, hippie commune, it sounded like to me, kind of a thing. He eventually, through all kinds of wanderings and, you know, becoming interested in Crowley and everybody else, like became an editor for this Playboy forum, which wasn't like, even though he was into sex shit, like this was not a sex forum. For what I say, it was like
they made it very clear it wasn't a sex forum. However, it was for living the Playboy lifestyle,
promoting the Playboy philosophy of the great Hugh Hefner. So you can see there's like a lot of problematic sex shit in this. It's like very sexist. Like a lot of his sex rituals just like involve like putting his dick into shit and like, you know, coming to some kind of revelation.
4 hours. Literal hours.
Right. Well, and Crowley was very famously I don't know, put a label on it, sex addict, but like, I don't know. Who knows how heroic these guys really were with their sex, but supposedly this dude could have sex all day, every day. Like, I don't know.
What a cool guy.
I know, fucking awesome. So, and, have all kind of cool incantations to go along with it. And it sounds like for both of them, frankly, for everybody of this era, frankly, which would fit in with the Hugh Hefner philosophy of, life or whatever. It was very male-oriented sex.
Yeah.
So you're not, but yeah, there. So, anyways, so he wound up at Playboy, writing with another Robert Shea, and they would get all these letters that were like conspiracy kook letters and stuff like that. And so, he had some background in it, so he like kind of thought of a really funny idea with Shea, which was like, what if like all these were true? Every one of these conspiracies was true.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes against the natural tripper's mindset, where normally people in a paranoid, schizophrenic sense, or a just psychotic, non otherwise specified sense, they definitely latch onto one idea, and that is the reality, which we talked about in the previous, talk. And then that is something they go off of. However, I think his main distinction is that he tried to find a singularity between all of these conspiracies, all these realities.
Didn't care about the contradictions. I think you were saying something before that you liked the phrase about not a one, not a harmony, but like just a conglomeration of difference.
Yeah,
basically.
If you listen to people in like psychedelic experiences, they always discuss the unification or unity of everyone. We are in everything and everything is all in us. However, he definitely makes that distinction that we are a non-unified state. We are distinctive, different people. That somehow are intertwined or at least, connected. And I think with his theorization of all these different conspiracies, he definitely understood they were different. He definitely pulled them from, thousands of letters and, readings that he had, but he tried to create them as one unified state, which, again, kind of goes against his whole idea against unification, but...
A unity of difference, if you will, rather than a universe, a multiverse or something like that. Mm-hmm. But... well, even in the word universe, there's the uni part, but then there's the verse part, which is the difference. So like it is kind of already a unification of difference. But anyway, thinking a little bit back to H.P. Lovecraft here again. So H.P. Lovecraft creates like with little bits of reality, I guess, like actual secret spells or something. Like uses it and like makes something. And Crowley really took off with this. This is like, because he was coming out of the Golden Dawn, this like, secret society of rich people. I don't know what the hell it was, but anyway, it's like it had kind of like broken up because they were all a bunch of. They hated Crowley for one thing because he like stole everybody's spells or shit and like published them and stuff like that. I don't really know what the hell all the fighting was about. But anyways, and so they were taking bits of like historically, verifiable things or whatever, but then making their own thing. And I should say one of the really important things to me, anyway, about Lovecraft's materialism is that it was a total indifferent universe. That was like kind of like the main feature of it that I noticed. So that like his some of the demons or beasts or whatever you want to call them that are in the Necronomicon or whatever it's called, they are they're not like other kinds of demons. They're in charge of bad shit a lot of times, but like some of them very notably are just like chaos beasts that don't give a shit. And like that's the way that H.P. Lovecraft's horror really works, especially coming out of the Enlightenment and coming out of like all these kind of like both scientific movements and then the reaction against the scientific movement, and a lot of that having to do with like this sense of like science had just taken meaning out of the world. Basically, it just became this totally indifferent materialist reality. And then H.P. Lovecraft does the kind of ironic thing of like personifying meaninglessness, so that like the demons are like these chaos beasts, these end of meaning kind of beasts, these like purposeless, totally indifferent, and like all the horror just is like human beings realizing how indifferent the world is to them or whatever. So they're developing a kind of I don't know, mythology around meaninglessness or the void, or something like that, which is I don't really get that sense from Crowley at all, actually. And he was really into, and this is going to be so important as we get into this, a concept of will that could be kind of Nietzschean. It was going to be really important with. We talk a little bit about Ayn Rand as little as possible because I can't stand her. But anyways, this sort of like, and he also was very well developed in Robert Anton Anthony LaVey, Anton LaVey, Church of Satan and whatnot, was this idea of like, the highest thing is my will or whatever. And there's some subtlety to that I'm running roughshod over, but like, certainly for Crowley, it was like this idea that the totally meaningless universe, the most important thing is me and my will or whatever, and my will to power in some sort of like bootleg Nietzschean version where they really didn't understand, I don't think, a lot of what Nietzsche meant. But anyways, so be it. That's kind of how it went down, and a lot of these guys were also racist because like they believed in like the superiority of like the white race and their will, and like if you look at H.P. Lovecraft stories, it's, part of the inferiority of the non-white races is like they're super superstitious, and so they've retained a lot of the old ways or whatever, or our closeness to these meaningful gods, but the real gods are these meaningless chaos maniacs or whatever that just like are doing whatever they're doing and don't give a shit about you. So anyways, I don't know, a little bit more background, but they wanted to take everything seriously, and so this is around the time too of JFK's shooting, and so like after that there was an investigation because it seemed a little fishy. There was a Warren Commission appointed, and they were trying to get to the truth of like, was there anything else going on? And there were all kinds of weird synchronicities about the event and whatnot. And so like that's who was writing into Playboy. They were coming up with all kinds of stuff. The alien stuff was big at the time. And there's a big and important note that a lot of like the alien mythology that gets reported like maps on pretty well to like other types of demonology and angelology, especially angelology. Like a lot of religious studies professors have noticed like these things have got very similar purposes and very similar categories of experience and stuff like that. So anyways, that all of it's true, and the big one of all of them was probably the silliest of all, which was the Illuminati, which has become this incredible example of how total bullshit, based on a little bit of kernel of truth, can become real. Like in the past episodes, we used the Necronomicon as an example of something that became real. That actually, I think the Necronomicon was not published by H.P. Lovecraft, but I think it came out in like 1977 or something like that as a real thing, and it was like full of all of Lovecraft's like beasties and spells and shit.
50 years after the first mention of the Necronomicon.
Yeah, right. And there was people started to believe that it was real. So this is sometimes called hyperstition, by people like Nick Land and stuff like that. I guess he somewhat invented the term, but just the idea was that you're kind of like willing something into reality. This goes back to the idea of like, the primacy of the will, especially in people like LaVey and Crowley and Ayn Rand. And so the idea that, you can like will a world into being or something like that. But anyways, like, and then people have actual practices, as you mentioned before, from the Necronomicon, and these totally made up beasts, and like, so there are actual like rituals that people believe to be somewhat efficacious for Cthulhu or whoever, you know what I mean, like calling in Cthulhu into existence and worshiping Cthulhu and totally made up crap. But like, I would argue that actually, and I'm a proponent of religion, so this is not meant as a put down, but I think all religion is like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a big argument between like, fiction becoming reality due to the practice alone. I think if you created a story and then people start reenacting it, does that therefore
verify that it is real? My argument would be absolutely not. I don't think that. I think there's truth into willing something into the universe, but maybe small, synchronicities that you can, put yourself in the right place or the right situation to bring something that you're looking for, something that you think you need. But I don't think you can completely, create a reality out of, a hunch or a collection of ideas that other people have created. I think it needs to be, more felt out and unified. I think, too, we're talking about men that, again, are very idealistic in a sense that they are gods themselves and that they can manipulate their own will against the will of something greater than them. I mean, they're obviously very self-centered, selfish. Who has rampant sex parties that just have casual religious interplay thrown in to make them seem greater than they are? I think a key party sounds lame, but if it's a, if it's a ritualistic experience, I think these already, inflated egos can just continue to grow, and they use that, I think, as a sense of, I'm greater than myself.
Yeah. So this is where the ethics of the mind fuck come in big time for me. Because in many ways, Illuminati was a mind fuck that wound up mind fucking Robert Anton Wilson himself.
Yeah.
Especially with this series of phenomenons that he called the series phenomenons or whatever. So he felt like he was actually communicating with some, like, I don't know.
Well, I just want to say
alien intelligence or something.
I just want to say too, the Illuminati was real in Bavaria.
Oh yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, hundreds of years before this was brought up again. However, there wasn't an emergent until the JFK assassination, and that spiraled out of control. This mindfuck became, reality consensus after a while due to, I think, people reacted to the lone gunman theory in a way that it didn't make any sense to them. So they had to create a version that, rectified...
A secret organization.
Yeah, that rectified that, cognitive dissonance in their mind that there's something wrong, we can't put our finger on it. And then they created, again, all these what-ifs. And these what-ifs, what if, all of a sudden transitioned at one point due to abundance or just, repetitive conversation to where these what ifs became something dogmatic, something real, something that you could, something tangible.
Yeah, I should so it's a historical kernel, and there's always been suspicion about Freemasons because they're a semi-secret organization or whatever, and also seem at times to be either pro-government or against the government. There's in different contexts they were different things, but the Illuminati were in a very small movement in southern Germany, Bavaria, where a couple guys, it was really just one guy who kind of got other people to try to help him, infiltrated Freemasons and tried to basically take over, kind of without letting the Freemasons know what was happening, acting like they were their friends or whatever. But it never really went very far.
Time, we can discuss this maybe off the podcast, but I have experienced a Freemason ritual.
Oh, wow,
it was a
cool.
45-minute ritual where I was cloaked, in robes,
nice,
had chains draped over me, broken over with a sword, a lot of symbolistic, drank from a chalice. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, the Freemasons are still prevalent. They're definitely integrated into, American fraternity, sorority culture.
Right, yeah.
But
and
yeah, nothing.
Our founding fathers, George Washington, famously, our money, whatever. It's not quite as nefarious, and it's not quite as all-knowing and all-controlling as it. It's a little more impotent than it appears, I think, though, at times.
Impotent, I think, is a good term for those that, again, they need to build up their reality and make it more meaningful than, I think it really is, And I think this argues against the, Lovecraft trying to create these meaningless beings, and therefore they're creating meaningful men that are, creating these stories about these meaningless characters,
That's right. So the first thing, somehow... I guess because the charter of the Illuminati, which was a very rationalist charter, and they were actually secretly, they didn't tell the Freemasons this, the head guy was an atheist, and he actually wanted to do something like eventually happened in France with I forget what they call it in France, but after the French Revolution it was called the cult of the higher being or supreme being or something. It was supposed to be just very generic worship of rationality, basically. And
worshipping rationality? That is insane.
Well, basic principles I don't know, fraternity, equality, and the principles of the French Revolution. But one of the charters of the Illuminati somebody discovered like seemed like it was like basically the charter of the French Revolution, and so like somebody then theorized, oh, the Illuminati were behind the French Revolution or whatever. But it was like really more like a part of the time, a time of, you know, a desire for, you know, end of kings and end of like the Catholic Church's power over things, and like end of like religion controlling things. And so, you know, it just was like in the air, this kind of like rational, I don't know, more rational desire to like have religious ritual, but let it be rational, like have all these like, so like, you know, in a Freemason thing, all those things, like they're talking about the ancient Egypts and about, you know, probably about Hermes and like Trismegistus and all. I guess, I don't know, I've never been in one, but like they're using all these kind of ancient principles that, you know, could be considered religion, but it's like to point out like this rational organization of the world and of the universe or whatever, rather than, you know, to, you know, hand it over to some capricious, all-powerful, you know, God or whatever.
Well, I'd say people that believe in the Illuminati or any sort of organization like that, they are really relinquishing their own power in terms of, if there's a revolution of thought at any time, if there's a revolution of like ideals, to immediately claim that there is a higher, you know, organization above you that's pulling the you know, pulling the strings, you know, creating all of this. I think it's really interesting that people would succumb to that and want that over having an idea that, oh, we as a society are evolving or pushing a revolution towards a new thought. There
That's
always
right.
has to be something greater than them. I think in modern politics, there's definitely a misunderstanding that, you know, there's things out of your own control as a citizen, civilian, and you always kind of question whether or not these government officials or higher ups are on another level than you are, because, well, this seems so thought out, this seems so planned. And when you come down to it, it's like you assume that there's so much foresight in every decision that's being made in society, in the world. Well, it comes to fruition eventually that foresight, you know, the plan has changed a million different times, and there is no greater power developing these revolutions. You know, it's a series of events, you know, that are somewhat, you know, indeterminate and, you know, unidentifiable to you at the moment. But when it comes out, you know, later on, I feel like you can see that, you know, the game plan of a secret organization that is now overthrowing a civilization or, you know, creating a new world order. You know, it's really interesting to me, at least, that that power dynamic has to be within something unknown that's greater than yourself, because as a single society or person, you're just, I guess, unable to do that on your own. You know, you need something
Yeah.
better.
So I guess the way we could think about the progression here is like, so you have this like desire for rationalism above superstition. So that was like the way the French Revolution and the Illuminati's takeover of Freemasonry or whatever was like kind of perceived as like, we want to like have a more rational way of being. But then there was this very famous failure of rationality and very famous reaction against it in Romanticism especially. And then there was, you know, science, and then there was a kind of reaction against this totalization of science, in which there was a meaninglessness that, you know, people experience, and so they wanted some other kind of a meaning. So it becomes a kind of crazy irony that you get this Illuminati that was kind of founded to like on very much the ideals of rationality and whatever, and a desire to try to like, I don't know, there was certainly a desire to like recover like ancient ritual, but they were like very deliberately were designing the like steps of their initiation and stuff like that. Like, how are we going to do this? We're going to do it kind of like the Freemasons, but like a little bit different, like, or whatever, so that we have our own brand kind of a thing. And like, you know, you could imagine like the final revelation of the mystery cult would be like, oh, rationality like rules the world, and like everything's got a, you know, a scientific explanation or whatever. But it like totally backfired. And then the supreme irony of it is that you get this ridiculousness of the Illuminati as this all-controlling organization that, you know, I don't exist somehow as a secret cabal that's like calling the shots behind everything, and it just becomes this, I don't know, ridiculous explanation for everything.
I think the irony for me and the ridiculousness of it all is that these men are single-handedly decimating any sort of meaning in their life, and therefore they have to create something more ridiculous to give meaning back to their own lives. It's like, I don't know what benefit they're getting from that switch. You know, are they losing it too deep?
I don't think they're totally aware of it.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to rectify a meaninglessness with meaning that was already there in the first place.
Yeah. So yeah, just this total mind fuck, if you will. So Robert Anton Wilson, they take it on. He writes the famous Illuminati trilogy, infamous Illuminati trilogy, which is kind of like just full of like crude boy joke humor and just silly shit and like, yeah, sex magic, just like, like conspiracies, aliens, like Chapel Perilous, like all this kind of like having to like, I don't know, navigate your way through all kinds of this maze of like overthinking it, basically. Yeah. So I mean, and why it's such a mind fuck is that it's just it was a joke, at least in part, but like then they wound up taking it seriously, and I think, you know, he had a kind of an in-between position, the double bookkeeping position, for a long time, and then it just flipped. And I don't know why exactly, but Eric Davis marks this moment, like right after, it's like I guess it was like a full day after Robert Anton Wilson had stopped tripping, and he saw across some cornfield, like he was living in a community at the time, like a green man of some kind who was like making merry, like, you know, he was like a, I don't know, figure out of like a trickster figure out of mythology or something like that. And he wasn't tripping, so he, you know, assumed it was like kind of real. So it's like, here's this movement now. I'm like, the things that I'm, you know, I don't know, thinking about, or like the things that you would think about as a part of the, you know, imaginary realm are now like manifesting themselves in reality. So there becomes this relation between the imaginal and the real. And so this is why a lot of these people started looking back to William Blake, who had a very interesting relationship without drugs, I think, reality, because it's 17th century, like kind of like relation between his Christianity, mystical reality, and, you know, just like reality itself. So like he could famously be talking to the fairies in the tree, realize that nobody else could see him, but also talking to you at the same time. And, you know, he had all kinds of ideas about, you know, his version of Christianity, which most people would be like, that's not Christianity. But anyways, he thought it was. And he was kind of a disciple of this guy, Swedenborg, who was another weird esoteric Christianity guy. So, like, this loop that gets talked about in the book so much between the imaginal and then the real. And I love it towards the end of the second chapter on Robert Anton Wilson. Eric Davis talks about how Cosmic Trigger, which I think is the third part of the trilogy, becomes like this therapeutic exercise for Robert Anton Wilson, because it helps him to finally get out of it to some degree.
I think he's forced into that therapeutic exercise. I think I made this distinction before where a psychedelic-induced, you know, psychotic state seems so acute versus like something that gets built out over time that your only option post tense is to crawl out of that headspace, and the only way to do that is to, like, you know, rationalize everything you're seeing with truth and imagination. You know, I think if you're fully in a psychotic state, there wouldn't be that ability to do so. But like a psychotic experience is so brief and so small in the scheme of, like, you know, when I say built out, you know, I'm sure that people that are gradually brought into a psychotic state have more time to kind of further dive in and to further develop these ideas. When it's just a green man in a cornfield, you know, what do you do with that information, you know? I mean, he is so flexible in his paranoia and synchronicity that, you know, I told you before, like the term 30 or 23 that he's obsessed with, you know, throughout his entire, you know, third book. You know, 23 skidoo is just a nonsensical saying. However, that throws him into complete, you know, derealization of his own life. And when I think what's just there's nothing behind it. So what do? You have to rationalize it. You have to be therapeutically, you have to face it head on, as abrasive as it may be, and work your way out of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think the John Lilly example is kind of a good one for me too, because he crosses over the line, but and never comes back. But Robert Anton Wilson, who kind of was I wouldn't say disciple, but definitely used, he would make these tapes for himself where they were phrases, like John Lilly's phrases or whatever.
Take seriousness serious, or that's one.
He would come up with all kinds of things. I would imagine they kind of redound to this loop between the imaginal and the real. So often articulated as something between the impossible and the possible. So that he was trying to listen to these tape loops, and he got into all kinds of yogic practices, including chanting mantras, and just some of them were very silly, the skidoo and whatever, all that kind of stuff. He oftentimes didn't even know what they meant, but he would just try to bring this mindfuck into his brain so that he could break down the difference between the possible and the impossible. So I would imagine all these little Lilly tapes had something to do with that. They were kind of stuff that had to do with you can do the impossible, semi stupid inspirational crap.
But they inspired him, the take seriousness serious, that came to him in a dream. He woke up, recorded it immediately, and he claims that sentence that he spoke into existence triggered his ability to talk to these extraterrestrials.
Nice, yeah.
Which spawned him, I'm sure great enjoyment for a while, until he kind of realized that, what the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah.
I just don't think that he ever had a serious thought in his head that he could back up. Well,
as you said, and as Eric Davis said as well, his daughter dying, that'll really sober you up. And once your imagination, whatever you can do, with your will, projection of your will, with the imaginal, getting a situation that you don't have control over for real, and it's not, and it's it just has this just pure facticity to it.
Well, I think reality will always bring you out of any sort of psychotic, episode, in the degree that it sobers you up to what's right in front of you that is tangible. I think me personally, I was trying to think of all these synchronicities that I thought I had in my previous life, and I think I've been so out of that mind frame for so many years that nailing down exactly what those synchronicities were was extremely difficult for me. I think when it comes down to it, my idea would be, it's almost a lot of the moments that I think I had in a psychotic state would be when someone calls you and you think, oh, I was just thinking about them. That's pretty interesting. I think that would be extrapolated to the 10th degree of, I was just thinking about this. Oh, my God, it just happened to me. But again, as I've said before, I think the timeline gets skewed to where, something happens to you, and in your brain, oh, I was just willing that. I was just thinking of that. I was just calling that out into the ether, and it came to me. When in reality, I think it gets flipped around in the sequence of events that happens, which I think for, Robert Anton Wilson, I think he probably saw something in his stupor state that he was in, and then rectified that as something that he called out and called it synchronicity. But again, the timeline's just so flipped to where that sequence, makes sense in his mind, but he gets flipped out of it. And with his daughter, I think it's interesting, her death definitely pulled him out, but at the same time, after he found that network poem, it brought him right back in to where he all of a sudden related this poem that she left, it brought him back in a psychotic state, I believe. And I think it's interesting too, with any death, there always has to be, people obviously want more after life. And I think, we've talked about before about that neuroscientist's trip into the afterlife, where he finds his sister as a butterfly, and it kind of rectifies the whole trip as verifiable, you know?
Right.
Proof of heaven.
Yeah, proof of heaven. Eben Alexander. Yeah.
And I think death is the ultimate source of, flipping back and forth, because people can use the evidence that they have before them, and instead they conspire with, different modalities of mythology and, religious experience to kind of flip back into, an explanation into death and life.
Yeah, and I don't want to flip entirely into skepticism either, because we're trying to maintain a kind of in-between position, which I think is probably because that's why I'm not anti-religion necessarily.
No.
I'm certain types of religion for sure, especially religions that are certain. and that's why I would count scientism as a part of that certainty. But I just so like. Another example that was given in the book to just kind of illustrate this sort of in-between position at any rate, Carl Jung, he definitely flipped into it, and it seemed like to a lot of people that his Red Book was like evidence, because he claimed to be talking to this Philemon guy or something like, I forget what the guy, Philemon maybe was the name of his angel or whatever. And that was a lot of the, what Crowley was trying to do was like get in touch with his like, I forget what he called it, some kind of angel, like, not archangel, but something like that, like this angel, and so a lot of the point of like Crowley's rituals was to talk to that person, or whatever it is. Jung, it would appear in the Red Book is talking to that person, like he just like without any doubt or whatever. But the example that was given in the book, the Eric Davis book, is a very famous one. Could be bullshit, I don't know, but that's the thing. They all could be bullshit. Like some of them are clearly bullshit, and some of them are kind of like, well, I guess, but like, So he had a patient, and I don't remember right now a lot of the ins and the outs of it, but she was there, and she was talking in therapy. She was kind of like not really able to accept many of the parts of her therapy with Jung because she was very skeptical and educated or something like that. And I don't know what she was talking about it for, but she was talking about this mystical beetle, dung beetle, I think. What are they called? I don't know, the mystical dung beetles with the cool wings, the scarab or something like that, beetles or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, they're from Egypt. And as she was talking about it, there was a smack against the window pane, and Jung just without hesitation got up and like picked it up, and it was a beetle or of some kind. I don't know if it was like an Egyptian one, but like he was just like, and here's your beetle or whatever. And then like after that, she was able to accept his therapy or his direction, because he had proved to her the synchronicities of the world, that they are meaningful, and that there are things that are happening that just can't be entirely explained away. The problem is if you take that and then totally get lost in it, and then that becomes your whole existence or whatever.
Well, I think Jung was really different than a lot of people in terms of and correct me if I'm wrong, he was a proponent of fate. He was a proponent of the trickster and things becoming more revealed as they become more hidden, and in turn that is like his description of fate as a whole. And I think if you're looking for synchronicities or coincidence that we see nowadays, you have to understand that the fate would be the hand at charge, the hand that creates that, where Robert Anton Wilson, I think, is developing his own will versus his fate. And therefore when he experiences these synchronicities, it's almost as if he is he's winking back at the jester, and saying, oh, I developed this, I created this, instead of the universe was providing this for me like Yoon had. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
No, totally. I mean, one of the ways that Eric Davis talks about him getting out of his psychosis, besides his daughter, at least temporarily, the worst of it, I guess, the whole, it wasn't called Solaris, the whole whatever thing that he was going through, the planet, solar system thing that I can't remember. I can't remember the name of it. But anyways, get out of this whole idea that whatever alien intelligence was communicating to him through synchronicities and actual like messages and stuff like that, was that this guy Jacques Vallée, who was a kind of famous UFOologist, who wasn't a materialist, but he was skeptical in a different direction. He didn't think they were like aliens from other planets. He thought they were like intelligences from here, like, and that they were like trying to control people's mind by like implanting ideas in them through all these weird synchronicities and things like that. And like, it seemed like Robert Anton Wilson then felt like, well, like, I don't think he completely bought it, but he was just like, you know, he kind of like realized like we don't know what the hell these ideas are, how they come into our brain or whatever, and they're not to be trusted.
I mean, he adopted that agnosticism that he claimed would get him out of the Chapel Perilous.
Yeah.
Is that he had to just look at them as they were and say, you know, that could be a communication, you know, lasered into my brain, or that is my own, you know, self doing that.
Yeah, so there's got to be this kind of, to me, like you can't ever leave the skepticism behind entirely, and you're not going to get like a definitive, like totalizing answer either way. It's always going to be this skeptical thing. I guess we could just sort of wrap it up a little bit with Jack Parsons, because he's such an interesting figure in this as well. He's mentioned, but maybe not as much. So he was a follower of Crowley also, who was like the inventor of like rocket fuel, and like kind of like this began NASA. Again, another example of like somebody who had a really weird kind of like devotion to Crowley and to, I don't know, esoteric practice and like, you know, sex parties and, you know, like big, you know, all that kind of stuff, and believed like that it manifested this very real thing, which was like his incredible technical like ability that supposedly none of the other scientists at NASA could understand where he was getting this shit from, and it was like from the other realm or whatever, you know what I mean? So like there's another one which continues to get brought up all the time. It's like, well, look, there were fruits to his practice. Like he like we're on the moon because of that dude, you know, Jack Parsons or whatever. So it's just kind of like, and he blew himself up, or else he was assassinated with rocket fuel at one point. So, you know, it was one of those things where everybody was like, "There's no way," because he was so good with, he blew himself up at his house with rocket fuel or whatever that he was set up or something like that. Again, totally undecidable.
I mean, last week a list of NASA scientists came out. Over the last 3 years, there's been 12 that have gone missing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I saw that too. Bizarre, dude.
Yeah, real weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, you don't want to be in the position, I don't think, where you just like poo everything, you know. And I guess maybe this is, unless you have something else, like this is like the end all ends. The Illuminati like was, in some sense, I mean, it was an organization, and but like, for all intents and purposes, whatever little historical kernel there was, like Robert Anton Wilson willed it into existence, and it's played this gigantic role in like pop culture at any rate, and just our present day society fascination with conspiracy theories, enjoyment of paranoia, like an explanation, which I think, you know, in many ways comes back to your original point that it is this desire to have some kind of explanation, even if it's totally irrational, ridiculous explanation, which is funny that it's the way that rationality winds up undoing itself, which is very much the way, you know, the Enlightenment's ideas about rationality wind up undoing themselves. For me, most famously in Immanuel Kant, when follow rationality as far as you can go, and you wind up in an antinomy. So for some of the examples that Kant had were causality. So like the very famous problem of first cause, like you wind up where you can't go any further, you can't follow the chain any further. Like, well, what caused that? You know, it's like, you know, like, so like what caused cause is the question.
Well, I think Lovecraft, you know, speaks on Kant in the degree that, you know, we accept reality as it is for practical application, you know, but then once, you know, we're alone and it doesn't impact our, you know, practical day to day, you know, there has to be something that we're reaching towards. And I think, again, no matter how ridiculous or who came up with it in what forum or discussion, we need that
Playboy forum.
Yeah, we Playboy forum. Yeah,
under the watchful eye of Hugh Hefner.
Yeah, we need those conspiracies to at least draw us outside of practicality and into like a, you know, I don't know.
Well, it's just we can only follow. I mean, it's just very clear. Like, rationality has its place, but it like ends. Like, there's a point at which it just can't go past. And like that's I mean, because time was so important for the McKennas and for Anton Wilson and just for a lot of people, like all the conundrums of time. I'll just mention Kant's conundrum around time, which was like, how does time begin? like you know, like that's an antinomy. Like, what was before the beginning? Well, nothing, because the beginning was the beginning. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but like, how could that, you know, be linear or whatever? So like, you know, he mentioned Nicholas of Cusa, another mystical figure that like a lot of people got into, because he like was able to talk about the difference between infinity, like explain infinity in new ways, and you know, 17th century monk, whatever. But like, kind of all like these problems that you cannot, you know, use rationality to get out of, basically.
Well, I think a lot of these people, it's why they're they're so gravitated toward like quantum physics and quantum mechanics, because, you know, there's so much inside of that is unrational or non-rational, and there's so much that they can't describe, but they kind of just throw it away, and they say, well, you have to accept it as it is, you know, like, that doesn't make any sense, but you either take all of it or none of it. And these guys really just took all of it. You know, they took as much as they could and created as many webs as they could, and conjoined as much as they could to create some sort of singularity. And, you know, again, practicality, they can reason, but any sort of symbolic archetype in their mind, they have to gravitate towards something greater.
Yep. So, with that, I don't know. That was pretty. We crammed so many people in there. It was very hard to get through Robert Anton Wilson because of all the interconnecting pieces. I mean, there was a lot of people we left out that we could have brought in, and maybe we will next time for Philip K. Dick. But Burroughs was, you know, somebody I saw as, you know, left out of both these conversations. Maybe we'll figure out a way to get him in, but he's been a part of all that as well. But so anyways, thanks again, Dom, for doing this with me.
Appreciate it, Marty.
This was always fun. I feel like we're learning together all kinds of stuff, and you know, we'll continue to try to tie it into recovery, but it's probably
that'll be episode 4 or 5, hopefully.
That's right.